Hello, my name's Mike, and this is Mutual Reception Astrology. This is a Drunkstrology update brought to you by Alphadelic IPA, the India Pale Ale. This is a 7.2 alcohol content beer, and I'm going to talk about soul, spirit, and ego today, and kind of talk about like the different aspects of soul, spirit, and ego, how those connect to astrology, how those connect to planets, to placements, and it'll be rambling. I hope that anybody that wants to ask any specific questions definitely just asks. If you type something in, for example, I'm going to type something in right now. I'm going to type in hello, everyone, and post it. There, see? If anybody wants to type anything in, they definitely can. And I probably won't do that very often because it's kind of weird to type and talk at the same time. Try to get my glasses kind of balanced on my face. So this update is about soul, spirit, and ego, and the differentiation. Kind of waiting a minute for a couple more people to show up. And again, if you have any questions that come up around any of these things, go ahead and let me know. And all of these are opinions of the person speaking. They're not guaranteed as absolute truth, because why would I want to even try to guarantee something as absolute truth? I'd rather just have fun and talk about what, I've learned to be true over the course of time. Hello, Joanne. It's nice to see you. Welcome. This is Mike with Mutual Reception Astrology. This is an update, a Drunkstrology update brought to you by Alphadelic IPA by Hop Valley. And I will be talking about spirit, soul, and ego, kind of on astrological terms. So, I'll just go ahead and start, and hopefully once I get started, a few more people show up. If they don't, that's okay too. I do Drunkstrology because it's kind of fun to just ramble drunkenly about spiritual issues. I think it has something to do with my Neptune and Sagittarius in the ninth. I think that having that natally and having a lot of planets in Scorpio just makes me kind of comfortable getting loose and being open in this way. And I don't mind the lack of clarity that kind of happens from being a little bit buzzed while you talk online. So, ego. A lot of people in spiritual circles denigrate or talk shit about the ego. They think the ego is the worst possible thing. In reality, the ego is the part of ourselves that gets things done in kind of space and time. It is the doer from within us, right? So the part of us that takes, the material, space and time seriously is the ego. The time that we kind of get in trouble is when we identify the ego as like the prime mover of ourselves, right? Like of our big S self, not just like the little s selfishness, right? So when we identify with our ego as if it's ourself, then it leads us astray. Hello, Jane Megan. Our ego leads us astray because we've gotten out of contact with like what it actually is, right? Oh my gosh, there's more people arriving. So I'm just going to kind of go back really quickly, go back into what I'm talking about. I'm talking about ego, spirit, and soul. That's kind of three separate aspects of being. So ego in astrology is kind of associated on the high level with the sun, on the low level with Mars, right? The low level of ego of just self-gratification, of getting whatever you can from the world fuck the consequences is like the lower aspect of Mars. But also the idea of the ego as the thing that desires to go out and do things in the world, that's kind of the higher aspect of Mars. That's the better aspect of ego, because as we're humans being in the world, we need to actually do things. And it's our egos that help us to like go out and kind of take the hits that we need to take to move forward. So I'm going to go into just kind of a basic, and any time that people want to, they can make a comment, they can ask a question. I'm just going to ramble until I have like more guidance from people out there. I'm a really 7th house individual, so input tends to get me moving in good directions. I have 6 planets in the 7th house, which is way too many to have in one house, just so everybody knows. So, soul. Soul is kind of incarnational identity. Soul is the path of the ego through so many incarnations, so many times through the planes. Through the earth plane, that you have these habitual patterns and you have these echoes. The soul of us is the part that exists across time. It's still connected with time, but it's more 4th dimensional, whereas the ego is more of a 3rd dimensional expression, right? Ego is like, what do we do right now in the moment? What are we right now in the moment? What do we need to do to move forward right now in the moment? That's our sun, that's our Mars. Soul is more of a incarnational. It's like the path, the cycles that we keep coming back. We keep coming back to like learn more and more and more. And it's that part of us. So it's still within time a little bit, because that's the thing that allows souls to learn the lessons that we need to learn to become realized beings, right? And the soul is still caught up in becoming, because it's part of that process of becoming. You come into form to like learn more about your life, to learn more about all the possible potentialities of humanity, all the possible paths that you can take, right? You come into form to learn the things that you can only learn in the world of form. So that's soul. Ego is like the very direct experience. Soul is the experience over the course of many incarnations. And spirit is the part of us that's outside of it all. Hey, Gracie. It's nice to see you. Spirit is the part of us that's outside of time, that is always, that because it's outside of time, there's no incarnational identity, right? There's no, we keep going through this process. You've already, as spirit, you've already gone through that process. You're already outside of that process because you're not part of time. You're already completed. You're already whole. You're one, right? So people that are really connected with spirit, so spirit is kind of a Neptunian, soul kind of connects to the moon, it connects a little bit to Venus, and it connects to Pluto on kind of the darker aspects of soul. Because there are darker aspects of soul. It's not all sunshine and roses. And again, this is just my own opinions about all these things and how they connect. They may not be your opinions, and it's totally okay. I would like to have a conversation about how other people see these things. But again, spirit is outside of time. Spirit is not something. So if we have an identity that's spirit, spirit is part of the all. So it's connected with everything. And in order to be human, in order to be incarnate, which we all are, otherwise we couldn't be watching this, right? In order to be incarnate, we have to decide to limit what our spirit is to a form and to certain standards and prescripts. Like, we limit our ability to understand the all in order to take part. Does that make sense? To take part in something. When we take part, we are apart from the all. We're a part of the all, experiencing the all from a limited vantage point. Well, this is Drunkstrology, Gracie. And it's good to be here. So Venus and the moon and then Pluto on the darker aspects of it. Yeah, for sure. So when people are aiming for spiritual growth in their life, what they're usually aiming for, and this is what I've noticed over the course of my life, is they're usually aiming to disidentify with their ego, with a part of themselves that's limited in time and space, and to identify more with the part of themselves that is unlimited. And in fact, in some ways, that seems to be like the spiritual path, right? You go from Aries, which is the most, like, it's like building an ego to, like, be able to be limited in the first place. That's kind of the Aries path, is like building an ego to be in the first place. And then you go to Pisces, which is trying to fucking let go of it all. So that's kind of the astrological pattern, is way more away from the ego, going away from the ego towards like the letting go of the ego. And there's many roadblocks along that path, right? And one of the roadblocks is the soul. So to get back to kind of what the soul is about, the soul is like our patterns that we just almost can't help but to play out. I think that this soul, you know, there's aspects of it that are moon, there's aspects of it that are Neptune, there's aspects of it that are kind of Venus, which are kind of our tastes, like the things that we like, the things that we're attracted to. And often I think Venus shows us like kind of the history of our soul's likes, to a certain extent. But also a big part of soul is like North Node and South Node, which Gracie is talking about a little bit. To have Pisces, for example, like Gracie is talking about as a North Node, I have Pisces as a South Node. So the Pisces, the letting go of it all, is actually the thing that I'm not supposed to do. You know, I'm supposed to do the Virgo thing, which is to participate in the world fully as myself and not do any like spiritual, where I'm not taking responsibility for my own self in time and space. I'm not supposed to do that, and kind of spiritually bypassing. Whereas having a Pisces North Node and a Virgo South Node means that you need to let go of getting totally focused on the details of life and more open to the big picture. So that's kind of hard to do. I need to not focus so much on the big picture and take aim at the little things in life. And this is why I've always had a real focus on why ego is good. In a lot of spiritual groups across the internet, not just astrology groups. In fact, it's a little bit less notable in astrology groups. But I'm sure that a lot of people are online, you're in like different groups that are not astrology groups that are spiritually aligned. And in a lot of those groups, ego is like the devil, you know? They've basically identified, in many of these groups, ego with the devil. Which is kind of weak. Ego is a part of us that gets things done. And when we pretend that we don't have, it's true, without ego, the seed would never want to grow into a tree. It's really good to see you, Naomi. I'm glad you're here. Big props to Naomi. There's a seed that's growing into a tree inside of her right now, and I want her to know that there's nothing but good thoughts for that. And even if Gaian is not so excited about it right now, I think long-term Gaian is going to be very happy about that seed growing into a tree. Cool. So, yeah, ego. And this is something that I've gotten into many, many fights online about. Which is really funny because people that are saying that ego isn't important will actually take the opportunity to fight with somebody, which is definitely like arguing is definitely a function of the ego with somebody that's pointing out that ego is an okay thing, right? Ego is fine. Um, so it's kind of funny when you can kind of bait people that are online pretending that ego isn't important to fight with you about why ego isn't important because you're basically like making them express their ego. This might be my Aries rising and just my general like seventh house kind of mirroring thing. That is why I like that so much. But I've got to be honest, it's pretty fun. Um, there's certain signs that are less likely to really consciously accept their ego, right? Some signs are just naturally going to accept their ego. Like Aries, pretty easy for an Aries to accept their ego. They understand it. It's pretty easy for Leo. In fact, fire in general, pretty easy for fire to accept their ego. Kind of hard for Pisces to accept their ego, partially because Pisces is trying to fucking lose it as hard as they can. You know, they're trying to get rid of that aspect of themselves. But they kind of get spiritually attached to their ego and their patterns. The one of the hardest signs for like I think one of the big signs for like letting go of ego, as far as astrology goes, is Aquarius. And I think Aquarius really tries to disidentify themselves with the ego, being on the opposite side of Leo, which is kind of the blooming. It's kind of interesting because ego blooms early in the zodiac, right? Ego blooms in Leo. And then thereafter, it's kind of a progressive degradation of ego. In fact, you could think of Leo as the bloom of the ego, and then Scorpio is kind of the fade of the ego, or like the rot of that bloom. Because Scorpio is just as much ego connected as Leo is, but it's like a more dark side. It's more the if this is the head of the coin, Leo is the head of the coin, Scorpio is the tail of the coin. And Pisces, like Scorpio moving towards Pisces, is trying to get rid of the coin altogether. As hard as that process is. So, what was this? This is Drunkstrology about spirit, ego, and soul. I've gotten caught up in talking a lot about ego because I think that it's one of the parts that's least understood. Partially because there's a psychological understanding, like the Freudian, like Jungian ego, and then there's like the Indian, like Vedic conception of ego, and there's a much. It's kind of interesting. I'm going to go into kind of the Indian subcontinent. So a big part of the reason that in India ego was considered so negative was because there was an outside group, the Aryans, that came into India and basically took control of India, implemented a caste system. Caste translates to color system, right? So there's like the people that were lightest, the Aryans, were considered the highest caste, and the people that were darkest were considered the lowest caste, the untouchables, right? This is just, you can read into this. This is history. And in India, part of the reason why the presentation of the ego, why ego was considered so negative, is because they really didn't. The ruling class was much smaller in number than the ruling class was much smaller in number than the underclass, right? And ego means like ego is what gives you the desire to fight if there's something that doesn't fit, if there's something that's not fair. Ego is a part of us that like does battle. So in some senses, ego was denigrated in like the Vedic tradition to keep the people that were already on the bottom down and not trying to rise above their station, because they were told that they could come back in a higher caste, which if you look into what caste means, a higher color. It's really fucking interesting. So that is like the Eastern tradition, and I've deeply simplified it. But the Western tradition is more of... So I'll go really quickly into kind of the Western tradition of what the word ego means in the Western tradition. And much of Western astrology actually deeply connects with the psychological tradition. It's really interesting. It's kind of like we use psychology to connect back as the West to that mythic foundation that's always been one of the pillars of Western culture. It's always been the mythic tradition and kind of the scientific tradition, and those are the two pillars of our civilization. So anyway, ego is the middleman in the Western tradition, in the psychological tradition, between the superego, which is the part of us that's telling us we can always do better, and the id, which is the part of us that's just like, obey your basest animal instincts all the time. So the id is saying one thing, the superego is saying the other thing, saying we should always aim higher, try to get out of our body. The id is saying be as much in your body as you can, be as animalistic as you can. And the ego is like the mediator between those two. But if you want to kind of talk about like what is that highest? The highest can be like the Neptunian ideal, and kind of a little bit the Uranian ideal, but the lowest, the id, is definitely deeply connected with like the Plutonian aspect of us. And what's interesting in Western culture is we pretend that Plutonian, like the more that you pretend that Plutonian aspect isn't there, the aspect that just wants to do what feels good, the aspect that doesn't care who it hurts, like that aspect of us, the more that we try to deny that, the more powerful it gets. And the more likely we are to project it onto others so that we can take out our problems that are in ourselves on others to try to expiate them. I should probably it goes pretty toxic pretty quick. I don't want to get too deep in that. I was just trying to talk about like the difference between kind of the Vedic understanding of ego and the Western understanding of ego, because they're two definitely different ideas that come from different traditions, and a lot of people, like especially on spiritual Facebook pages, kind of conflate those two, so you never know which one they're talking about. That's one of the problems with words, is everybody has different interpretations of those words. And words like ego are super loaded. But there's a lot of depth to each of those. Like you can definitely, as a pretty heavy Libra is the root of library. I'm pretty into like the books and learning as much as I can about where words came from and what their basis is, because I think words have power. They're basically spells to a certain extent, and communication, and especially the written word, is a core foundation of civilization. Before we were able to put down, there's a lot of things. It's true. I've gotten really caught up in kind of talking too much about ego again. So I guess I should have just named this one talking about the ego. So I think soul is important to also talk about. So I don't know how many other people have done this, but one of the most interesting meditations that I've ever done was a past life meditation, and it was just a CD that I put in, and it would take you into a meditative state, and it would kind of lead you through the process of like kind of remembering different aspects of past lives. And whether it's true or not, whether it's true, I don't really care. Experientially, it was interesting. And it helped me to understand like certain patterns that I get caught up in over the course of my life or the course of my incarnations. And that's kind of what soul is about. Soul is coming into form, trying to learn something specific. And you use the ego as the tool to learn this thing that's specific so that you don't have to keep coming back and learning it again. And that has been a big part. Like, there's part of me that would just like to spiritually bypass and go to the spirit, which is above all that and beyond all that. But the reality is I know that I'm not done in the cycle of coming into form. Like, I'm not done with it yet. I'm not going to be done this life. So what I need to do is try to understand as much as I can of the path and purpose of my soul, and try not to get caught up in the same mistakes that I've made over the course of many incarnations. But if I don't, this is the thing about spirit, we all get there eventually, right? We're already outside of the game. So there's part of us that can just pretend that we're not part of this game anymore, you know? But as we're in it, we have to treat it like it's real. If we're in the game, we have to treat it like it's real. And that's the ego and the soul and the interplay of those to build kind of the fruit for the spirit that's outside of it. And that's the understanding that I have of it. And I feel like astrology connects really well to that, because it can kind of understand like the path of the soul, path of the spirit, as things are interacting with your outer planets especially. You can also connect to the superego or the higher mind aspects of life. And you can connect with like the lower instinctual processes. Like if we can make friends with our id, so to speak, like our darker aspects, and just recognize it as it is, recognize why it's there and what role it has to play, and try to take away the toxic aspects of it, that can be really powerful for our soul's purpose, right? Like the more that we can kind of detox those aspects of ourselves that are more animal and make them more useful, the more that we can connect to those higher aspects of ourselves and also be a conduit for these ideas that are coming in that will help to move forward like the bigger narratives, because we're not just part of our own narrative. We're also part of meta-narratives, and we all play roles in these meta-narratives of civilization as it moves forward. Like, the more open we are to being ourselves, the more that we can actually move that stuff forward. So our soul's kind of unfolding into spirit, which is what it's all about, is aided by connecting with other people. You know, it's part of that big process. I think that's pretty much it for Drunkstrology today. It's been really fun. And, yeah. Glad that I did it. This is Mike with Mutual Reception Astrology. Signing off for now. Thanks for everybody that came to watch and see this. It has been a great time. Enjoy.